Hello everyone and welcome to my honest opinions on Eternal. So for those not in the know, Eternal is another online CCG, collectible card game, in the vein of Hearthstone and Duelist, and now quite a few other games like Shadowverse, Faeria. It's becoming a relatively popular model. So Eternal is probably the game that's most similar to Magic the Gathering, which is, I think, kind of its secret selling point. So Eternal is made by Direwolf, who make both card games and video games. And their design team is comprised of some old Magic the Gathering pro players, including Luis Scott Vargas. If you're a Magic player, you probably have heard of him. LSV, as he's more normally known. So there's clearly some strong influences there. Just to clarify, for me, that would be a good thing. I have no real problem with card games or other games in general basing themselves off the work of others. Like, there's always the impulse when making one's own stuff to be new and completely different, set yourself apart. But there's also a lot of value in just iterating on a concept, doing something new. And Eternal is Magic online, more or less. It's also streamlined. People often say that, Hearthstone or Duelist don't have between turns interaction, like, the ability to play cards in your opponent's turn, because it would bog the game down. You can wait out the clock or whatever. But in Eternal, it actually works really smoothly. And it works in a way that's largely similar to how it does in Magic, which is one of the big selling points of Magic and Magic itself. So the fact that this is a game with instant, the ability to respond to your opponent's actions, would be a huge draw for me. Huge draw. So the other thing that Eternal offers that I quite like is it's got a few neat game modes. One thing it has a lot of emphasis on that I haven't seen before is AI play. So you can play Constructed or Draft against just AI opponents for free. It's Gauntlet and Forge, respectively. And you can also play, there's a normal ladder, and there's normal draft mode against humans. And there's also a campaign, which is like a storyline that I think you play through when you start. Apparently, maybe they've added more missions, because apparently I've got more of it to do, but yeah, either way, the game has some pretty good AIs. They're a lot less obviously derpy than they are in Hearthstone or in Duelist. Now, to be fair, Duelist is much more difficult than the games that don't have a board, so no criticism there. And the Hearthstone devs have made big strides in improving their AI, but what struck me with Eternal was that the AIs are good right from the start. Like, I played the game before it came out, I played the beta, and it had good AIs then. The AI combat was, they were predictable, but it was reasonably satisfying. It's a good way to grind and a good way to test your decks. What else do I like about this game? I love the way they do their drafts. So, in Eternal, when you draft in Eternal, you get packs of, I think, 15 cards? I've got a couple of packs, so let's just open one and count. They're like, 10 or 15 cards. What have we got? 7 commons, 8 commons, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 cards if I haven't miscounted. Yes. So you get 8 commons, 3 uncommons, and a rare or legendary. So in Eternal, you open a pack, a full pack, you pick a card from it. Then you get past the pack that someone else has looked at. So the way the game works is when you draft, it stores all the packs you left behind, basically, the ones you passed on, and it gives them to someone else. So when you draft, you get cards that someone else has, you get a series of packs that someone else has passed, which they were passed by someone else, and so on. Which means that it has a flow that's much closer to, like in Magic, where you're sitting around a table passing physical packs around, and you get signals. The whole concept of signals is kind of complicated, but just to summarize, if I'm playing, let's say, red, right? I'm playing red. This game has colors like Magic, as opposed to classes like Duelist or Hearthstone. I'm playing red. I'm taking red cards out of packs. I'm going to pass you cards with packs with fewer red cards. If you identify this, you can pick a color that I'm not playing. Because I'm filtering out the red cards, the stuff I'm leaving behind is going to be stronger in the other colors. So you might get a good, say, green deck. You then pass those cards on, and the person to your left, or the person further downstream in Eternal,
sees packs that have fewer green and red cards, but now maybe the people are leaving these blue cards behind, and so you take blue cards. And it's kind of a simplified version of how it works, but in Eternal you get that human feeling that you don't get in Duelist Gauntlet or in Hearthstone's Arena, which are much more, they're discrete. You just get some random cards and you pick from them. And obviously the fact that Eternal doesn't have classes, it just has these colours that you can mix together in your deck, enables that. You couldn't really do it with just classes, but the fact that it lets you draft like that is a huge plus for me. I love drafting in Magic. It's one of my favourite ways to play. Unfortunately, Eternal has a couple of things that I think really hold back the actual experience of the game, and they are twofold. One, like Magic, it has lands, which this game calls sigils, I think. So in Duelist and Hearthstone, you get your mana for free. You get 1 mana every turn up to a certain maximum limit. In Eternal, you have cards in your deck that generate a mana. You can play one of them every turn, which means that the amount of mana you have every turn is determined by how you've drawn. If you draw loads of sigils or loads of land, you're down on actual cards and you often can't do anything. If you don't draw enough, you can't cast your spells. This is kind of an inherent, what I would call a flaw in the design of Magic the Gathering, because Magic is very old. So Magic kind of gets away with it because it was the first card game ever. It was like Richard Garfield invented the genre of collectible card games or trading card games when he designed Magic. So on that basis, it kind of gets a pass. However, I don't think there's really an excuse for a game like Eternal, which is, 20 years newer, to have the same clunky holdover mechanic. Yes, it does mean that newer players have a greater chance to beat more experienced players than they do in a more deterministic game. Because the more experienced player can always stumble on mana and fail. But that's crap, right? It's out of either player's hand. Like, you get an unsatisfying loss or an unsatisfying victory. And I found that between that and the large size of decks in Eternal, which are 75 cards at least, which makes them very inconsistent, that the vast majority of my games just come down to, like, who drew the most mana. Like, it's not so obvious from this pack, which has a lot of cheap cards in it, but Eternal has a similar mana curve distribution of, like, creatures at costs and spells at costs that Hearthstone and Duelist do. Like, Hearthstone and Duelist, they have, 7 and 8 mana cards that see play in every deck, because you can do that. You can put in, that your players are going to get to 8 mana without having to put in loads of effort. So you can put in, you can play Meltdown in your deck. You can play 3 copies of Meltdown in your deck. You're always going to be able to cast it on curve. In Magic, most cards that see competitive play are cheap. 1 to 3 mana. So you can reliably do stuff in the early turns. You can quickly cast multiple spells in the same turn. In Eternal, it still has these high curves, at least at the level I'm playing at. I haven't played it very much. And from what I've seen, people are playing these decks with like 4, 5, 6 mana cards and more. There's like 9 mana cards that are used as finishers and stuff. But you still have to draw your sigils in order to play them. And that's completely out of your control. You can adjust the mix of sigils you put in, and you can adjust how your colours are balanced. The sigils provide you with different colours that let you cast different cards, which is how that works. Like, you can't play every colour at once. But between the fact that there's lots of big creatures, as well as lots of buffs, like you see a couple of them here. This one just gives a minion +3/+3 permanently. This one gives it +2/+2 every time you play a sigil, a power card, whatever the game calls them. There's lots of buffs, there's lots of minions, and the removal is often kind of inefficient. Again, the ones that see constructed play aren't, but there's not that much good removal. Which means that between the fact that you can quite easily make a big minion if you have the mana for it, and the fact that you can quite easily get screwed on lands or screwed on power, sigil, mana, whatever, and flooded on it, you draw too many of them. It's very hard to have a game that's actually fair and balanced in Eternal. Like, again, maybe at high level constructed, that goes away, and you get decks that are consistent and evenly matched against each other and interesting and dynamic. But most of the Eternal games that I've played, I just end up salty or unsatisfied. Like, either I steamroll my opponent because they didn't draw anything, or I get steamrolled because I didn't draw anything. The other thing is, there are these just ridiculous minions. So there's one here. This is a card called False Prince. Now, No, I think this card is a great piece of flavour. It's a 5/5 for 3 with Overwhelm, which is like Trample from Magic. When it hits a minion and kills it completely, leftover damage is dealt to the enemy player, basically. In Eternal, you don't attack creatures directly. You attack your opponent, and they can defend with their creatures, so they get to choose what goes in front, which again I like. That's another mechanic from Magic. But so this card is like slightly less broken than it would be in Hearthstone or whatever, but it's still pretty broken. Like, it's huge. It's way above the power curve. The downside is that whenever a spell is played on it, it turns into a 1/1, which means that your opponent's buff spells become removal spells, and you can't use buffs on it. However, none of that really matters. Like, maybe they've got a buff spell and they kill a False Prince, but it's only an uncommon. In my first Eternal draft, I got 4 of these. I went 7-0 like a boss. I crushed everything. Like, even, I played against another, like my last run was against another player with 6 wins. I played False Prince on turn 3, False Prince on turn 4, False Prince on turn 5, and he conceded. Like, what the hell is that? You can just do that. That's obviously an atypical deck, but like, there's so many ridiculous mechanics. Like, there are weapons that you can equip to your player. And they basically all have the ability that Arclight Regalia has in Duelist, where if they have a certain amount of health, like armor, when all the armor is gone, the weapon is destroyed. But hitting your opponent in Eternal doesn't cost you any damage. Your opponent doesn't normally have a power. So if your opponent doesn't play any minions to block the weapon, you can just hit your opponent for free every single turn and never run out of charge, which is absolutely ridiculous. Like, again, if your opponent just has a bit too much mana, or a bit too little mana, or a clunky draw, you can just play your weapon and kill them with it. 3 mana weapon can deal 21 damage to your opponent's face without them being able to stop it, if you can just keep their minions off the board, or if they just don't draw any they can cast. The whole game is really open to situations like that, and I find that the vast majority of games of Eternal I've played have come out unsatisfying. Even when I'm playing decks I like, even when I'm winning, like, the number of games where you like come up against it and then you fight and your opponent have like this really tense duel and there's a key play that swings the game, or your deck manages to go off and you assemble some synergy that pushes you over the edge or something. Those are really rare, despite the fact that there's a lot of interesting synergy in the game. There's some quite clever and cool things you can do. Most of the powerful cards are just so powerful, and the mana mechanic is so punishing and fickle that I found that most of the time when I lose, I just get salty. And I want to play this game so much. I want to love this game because it's Magic, but online. And Magic Online, actual Magic Online, the official one, is rubbish. And costs loads of money. This is free to play. It's similar to Magic. It's slick. It's nice. It's got nice art. Really like the art in this game. There's some cool flavor. There's some cool unit designs, but like, man, it just tilts me. Like, it's so hard for me to just sit down and play some games of Eternal and actually have a good time. And all of that's just really disappointing. The other thing is, the decks are large, 75 cards per deck. You get 100 free Shiftstone dust per pack, but the commons only disenchant for 1 each, so it's pretty hard to assemble lots of dust. The packs are like relatively expensive, and you can end up quite easily want to build a deck that has like 20 legendaries in it, and they are not cheap to craft. They're like a couple of thousand spirit or shiftstone, or it is each to craft. I think it's like 3,200 for a non-premium one, which means that to actually get like a proper deck in this game must take a long time, like a long time. In addition to that, there's a big steep curve between the rarities in power level. The commons are generally crap. The uncommons are generally like about the level I would build all of the cards at, and the rares are bonkers. This is again quite similar to how it is in Magic, and I have a problem with that in Magic as well, but there are some advantages. It keeps the powerful cards and the most exciting, like swingy, hard to deal with effects relatively uncommon, relatively rare. It's hard to
say this without reusing the rarity terms, but they happen relatively less often in draft, right? So you can print these powerful cards that people can have fun playing with, but keep them out of draft except on kind of special occasions where they can swing a game. So they can lead to these exciting moments but don't show up all that much. And you want your draft environment to be at a lower power level because people's decks are much worse. You know, they have to kind of be assembled at hog. They're clunkier, so having a format that's slower and lower in power level and where the basic mechanics of the game can shine is important, right? So in theory, I have no real problem with that. The thing is that in Magic, if you want to go to a tournament and you don't have the cards, you do at least have the ability to buy them outright on the secondary market or borrow them from people because they're physical cards. You can do that. You can trade them, borrow them, sell them, whatever. In Eternal, you can't do that. You have to open them or craft them. And it's the same problem as in Hearthstone. Hearthstone, I haven't bothered playing Hearthstone in ages because the deck I like is missing a cool legendary that would take me like weeks of grinding to get hold of. And in the meantime, there's not much else right now that's viable that I actually want to play. Not that the deck I like is viable, it's bad, but it's much worse without Kazakus, which is the card that I need. And getting legendaries takes so long, crafting them takes so long, you know, I can't go and buy a Kazakus on eBay, I can't trade one off my friends, I can't borrow one for a tournament. So Magic's kind of barrier to competitive entry is mitigated by the fact that you can borrow cards for tournaments, or you can just play whatever crap decks you want against your friends. Whereas in games like this, there's only the ladder, and on the ladder, you either have the good cards or you fall behind. And sometimes that's okay, but I actually want to be able to engage with the high-level play at some point. I want to climb. I love Duelist for that, because in Duelist, the legendaries are relatively easy to get, and you can get very far with cheap decks and cheap cards. And there are some effects that live at basic or common rarity that you can't get elsewhere. Dancing Blades was a very good example until they made Lava Slasher, but things like Repulsor Beast, you know, that's a basic, everyone has it. Healing Mystic is a basic. Primus Fist is a common. These cards are like really strong, like nice staples. They'll fill holes in decks, or they'll do you really well as a new player. I think Eternal has some like common removal spells that you can play. It's not like commons never see constructed play, but my god, they're so much worse. Like, there's a really good example actually. I've got a couple of cards in my collection that should show this off. So there's a black card called, I don't know what the purple or black faction is called. It's like Shadow or something. There's a black card called Back Alley Bouncer. It's a common. It's a 4/3 for 4. Okay, fine, right? It's worse than Chillwind Yeti, but it's a card. I'll play it. 4 mana black rares include this 5/5 with flying for 4 that deals you some damage, and this 3/5 with Death Touch kills any unit it damages that also hits on your opponent's discard pile, their graveyard. This card is a strong constructed staple. I don't know if anyone plays the big flyer, Impending Doom, but like, these cards are so far beyond this poor little Back Alley Bouncer. They're just infinitely better. Like, there is no way in hell you'd ever play this Back Alley Bouncer in a constructed deck unless you were basically just starting out and it was all you had, and you're just playing against other complete newbies on the ladder. That's reasonable. But like, given the option, you would never put this in your deck. You would always play Impending Doom or Steward of the Past. Like, there's literally no reason why you would play this Back Alley Bouncer. Never. Like, these have slightly more stringent color requirements, but if you can't cast them, you're not going to play this instead. You'll play something else in a different color that's also better. Like, this ramp of power level has always bothered me a bit in Magic. It bothers me a lot in games like this, where getting hold of rares is harder and more important, because there isn't like a casual kitchen table mode. There isn't, Magic has like 16,000 different cards. There's always something you can play that's fun or silly. There's always some, like, Magic has, cards have a monetary value or a trade value rather than a dust value. So in Eternal or Hearthstone or Duelist, all the rares cost the same amount to craft. So if you want to test a janky card, it costs as much as that staple legendary that you need.
In Magic, they have a value on the secondary market that's determined by their supply and demand. So it means that while tournament staples are very expensive, like crap cards are a dime a dozen. You know, the vast majority of Magic cards cost like 10p for a common or 50p for a rare, if that. And it's weird, because people say that Magic is expensive. It's expensive if you want to play like tier 1 tournament decks. If you're just playing with your friends, then you're spending 20 quid a deck, tops. Or you're just building stuff out of cards you have. They're a really good like value for money starter kits. Eternal has some quite nice on-ramping. I notice it keeps giving me these like theme decks that it wants me to like do quests with and play on the ladder and stuff. That have, you know, some like small new cards in. The problem is that all these cards they're mostly commons. They're trash. They're just complete trash. And I'm trying to play these decks on the ladder against people with either like similar archetypes that are actually properly built and have like rares and legendaries in them that I can't really beat just strategically. Because the game doesn't give you that option. Or, you know, proper decks. Or even just decks they've thrown together that happen to contain these powerful cards in. And like, this is a common problem with CCGs, but I think it's magnified in these games that have a high barrier to acquiring high rarity cards and ladder as the main method of interacting with other players. And like, we've seen from Duelist and like even from Hearthstone, if you've actually played casual mode in Hearthstone, that like trying to do unranked ladders doesn't really work. So I like that Eternal gives you the option to play against AIs, because if you don't have proper cards, you can at least just grind against computers. Or you can draft, and drafting is the great equalizer. It's purely skill based. You know, it's random what cards you get offered to some extent, but Eternal's kind of pick them and pass them system really mitigates that, and you get to see a lot of cards compared to how many you actually put in your deck. So I really like that. But then you get to the same problem where you're playing this game that's like inherently highly inconsistent, and if your opponent just plays a big minion, whether that's a rare or a random common they give, you know, a buff to, or a weapon when you don't have a way to deal with it, you can just be screwed. And the whole idea of these powerful rares is they're meant to give you ways to turn those situations around. But if the game's at parity and your opponent slams and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I have a removal spell in my deck that can kill that, maybe. Otherwise, I'm just dead. And that experience is inherently unsatisfying. I feel like, so this is technically a problem in Magic as well. But I feel like Magic does a better job of giving you the tools to deal with it than other games do, purely because, you know, they've had 23, 25 years to refine their systems, right? 24 years, I think, it's 2017 now. Magic came out in 1993. So they've had 23 or 24 years, depending on when it came out in 1993, to refine that system, to change that dynamic. And in most draft sets, there's usually like a few rares that you can't beat. Sometimes there's like a handful, sometimes there's only one or two. There's usually a couple, at least. But they're not all that likely to show up. They'll be like legendary rarity or the equivalent. Sometimes your opponent will draw them, etc. And most rares you can just kill. And the game does give you a removal that can deal with rares. Eternal does as well, but between rares and like the power of just buff spells, where, you know, they can really accelerate the game, you can die very quickly. In Magic, there's usually a lot of ways to deal with your opponent buffing a card. In Eternal, buffs work in a weird way, like they stick around after the creature dies, they don't get caught up by transformation effects. They're kind of relatively resilient, and I guess they wanted buffs to not be fully punishable by the removal that does exist in the game. But I've found in my experiences of actually playing it that in Draft, not so much in Constructed where you can play all the removal you want, in Draft, usually, you know, the first person to get down like a big-ish minion that the opponent can't then trump just runs away with it to victory. And again, this is in my, you know, relatively limited experience. I may have just had removal-like drafts, but I certainly know that the one time I got a deck with 4 5/5s with trample in it for 3, I was uncontested. Like, maybe 1 or 2 people put up a half-decent fight. It was absurd. So, yeah, to circle back to my point, I think although Eternal has a lot of potential as a set of core mechanics, and I really want to love it, They've clearly like put loads of effort in. There's some cool ideas. There's mechanics that you can do better in online games than on paper. The whole game is, all the decks like very inconsistent and very snowbally, thanks to the buffs and other similar things being powerful and hard to deal with. So ultimately, I want to love this game, but I find it really hard to actually like enjoy playing it. And so, I've given it a good try a couple times, and I always just lapse and go back to playing other stuff, which is a real shame. Like maybe over time, they'll actually improve it. They'll change cards, or they'll release new cards that have a bit more of a nuanced dynamic to them. Excuse me. But it looks like, at least for now, the overall playstyle, the rarity balance, and the large deck size are here to stay. And I think that's probably enough, and certainly the mana mechanic is here to stay. And I think that's probably enough to put me off it, which makes me really sad. Like, series is called Honest Opinions. In all honesty, I wish this game was amazing. I would love to play the crap out of this. But I just can't properly get into it. Right, so I think that wraps this up. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.